One of my goals is to get them to understand how the techniques contributed to that version of events so that they understand how to use the experimental techniques behind their science. And they're familiar both with how they're applied, but also the limitations of those techniques. And the textbooks generally aren't quite as good at that, and the students aren't quite as interested in exploring a technique for its limitations as I might want them to be. So in this last year, for example, when I started to challenge them about their answers to questions, how did somebody come to know that to be the answer? I found that they probably weren't spending as much time as I would like on understanding the methods behind the experiments. So that was one of the topics they nominated then for one of these 1-hour vignettes. And I did a summary of different kinds of experimental techniques, not to answer the question, not to say, and here's all the limitations of that technique and all the techniques you'll ever need to know, but as an example for how the student could then go back in their own time, look at the techniques and say, okay, based on the example, I know that there are different ways in which I can question how this technique is used and where it might have blind spots. My goals had to be expressed in a way where I could, as objectively as possible with the resources I had in this system, as objectively as possible measure the learning outcomes and show that it was causative, that the change led to that change in learning outcome. It wasn't just correlative. And I designed those goals and then the tools for measuring my achievement toward those goals around specific things I introduced into the classroom. And those were predominantly flipping it, but also having a set of semi-formative competence building tools for the prerequisite material that was introduced early in the course. So I knew that I had a uniform standard of understanding in my students before they were introduced to the new material. And as well as that, I wanted to try to get them to take some responsibility early on for what they thought they needed to know. So those were 3 kinds of tools I introduced into the class. And I introduced them at both 200 level and 300 level. More recently, I've introduced them at 100 level as well. And what I found was that I can make incremental improvements in learning outcomes. And when I say incremental, some of them are fairly important. That is, at 300 level, my learning outcome improvement is 6 to 8% higher than we would extrapolate from their prerequisite courses. That is a significant improvement, and it's also right on line with international research, which on large-scale tests shows about a 6% additional learning benefit from an active classroom over a passive classroom. So I can match that in my 300 level. I can't match it in my 200 level. I cannot find a premium for that technique, the flipped classroom, at 200 level. I do find it at 100 level. And what that tells me, or at least what I think it tells me at this stage, is that if the students haven't already been given an idea that lecturing is the way to learn, they'll open to new ideas. But if they've gone through a year or so of our curriculum experiencing lecture, then they think that's the way to learn, and they're not open to the new ideas. And it takes me 2 years to beat that back out of them when I get them into 300 level.